Joining me now are our Tuesday regulars, Labor's Terri Butler and National Senator John Wacka Williams. Good morning to you both.
Morning.
Morning.
Senator, does Australia need to take stronger emissions targets, emissions cuts to Paris, the Paris conference?
Well, we've made a commitment of 5% reduction by 2020, Callum, as the Labor Party did. We're just doing it a different way. We're sticking to that. Let's see what the rest of the world does. I mean, if
we're seeing what they're doing, and they're acting quite strongly in their post-2020 targets.
Who's they?
The United States,
Yeah,
China,
good.
Canada, New Zealand.
Well, let's see if the talk actually turns into action. But what annoys me is if we're going to lead the world, as we did with removing all our tariffs and our import restrictions, etc., and me being a former pig farmer and suffered from that, I see no reason why we lead the world. We'll go along with the world, but don't lead the world because it's very costly.
And so if the
I'm
world...
sure Terri would agree with me.
And so if the world...
Because I often do.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's be honest.
So the indications are the world is acting decisively to set higher post-2020 targets. Does that mean that Australia, in turn, should set more ambitious targets?
Now, my ambition is we'll go with the world. Don't lead the world. That's my opinion. And if the world are going to raise their targets, then I see nothing wrong with us going with them. But let's see the result of Paris first before the premature talks on what might happen. Let's see what comes out of it.
Wacka, you can't talk about the world as if we're not part of it, though.
We are part of it. That's the point I'm making, Terri, that we led the world on removing tariffs and import restrictions. As a pig farmer, we saw the importing of pig meat. You wouldn't experience it, I did. And it was very costly to shut down businesses here. We've lost our pig industry where I live. At Inverell, we used to have 6 large piggeries, now we have none. So what I'm saying is go along with what the rest of the world is doing, but don't lead the world and put the most expensive costs of emissions trading schemes and carbon taxes, etc. that I know you want to do, Terri. I know that'll be your policy next election. We'll play our bit, is what I'm saying.
Well, Wacka's told us Labor's policy, but maybe I should ask you. So Labor hasn't formulated yet its post-2020 emissions targets. There's reports that the Prime Minister is considering a target in the range of 24 to 28%. Does that sound like the sort of ballpark figure that Labor's looking at?
Well, look, the thing about the reports about what the Prime Minister's thinking about is, I mean, your guess about what the Prime Minister's going to do is as good as mine. The guy is really unpredictable, and I think, all these crazy things that he keeps doing, like asking us to support legislation we haven't seen, or leaking green papers that say that there's going to be cuts to schools and health and hospital funding. I mean, who knows what the guy's going to do? But I guess my best prediction about what the Prime Minister will do in this area is that he will do whatever it takes to mollify the hard right, like he has done with wind farms.
Okay,
I mean,
but back to the question,
crazy,
Labor's post-2020 targets, does a figure of 24 to 28% post-2020, is that the kind of ballpark range that Labor's looking at?
Well, I mean, we're obviously formulating our policy in advance of our national conference, which is going to be at the end of July. We'll be working right up into Paris. We've always had the view that Australia needs to play a constructive part in combating climate change, as Wacka knows. As Wacka knows.
Oh, of course.
We think that it's actually important to deal with the fact that all the leading scientists have worked together to come up with this target of 2 degrees above post-industrial levels. All of the forecasts seem to say that that's not really where we're tracking as a globe, and that's a real problem. I mean, it's a real problem for developing nations, it's a real problem for developed nations like ours. This idea that you just have a slush fund and you give out money to polluters and somehow that's going to mitigate emissions, which is your policy.
We'll meet our target, same as yours, with a lot less cost. A lot less cost,
What sort of range should Australia be looking at for post-2020 targets?
I'm not going to make that call. I mean, it's not my position to do that. As I say, we're working on what our policy is going to be. I would like to see Australia go to Paris. I'd like to see the Prime Minister take it seriously enough to go to Paris. You remember last year, just before the G20, the President of the United States and the President of China came out publicly and talked about emissions reduction, and our Prime Minister was missing in action then. I don't want that to happen this year. I'm not going to give you a figure on what the range would be, but I am saying that, obviously we're consulting with our stakeholders. We want to see real action. Yes, we think an emissions trading scheme, a market-based mechanism which has incentives embedded into it.
We're very familiar with your schemes, very familiar. The ones we were never going to have.
I don't know why the right is so sceptical about a market-based mechanism.
Well, let me just say something.
And you actually want this great big fund of money that you give out to
Terri, let me say something. We talk about we live in the world. 2 years ago, the figures for China are going to go from 10.3 billion tonnes a year of CO2 to 17.9 billion, up 7.6 billion by 2020. And they're saying they're going to reduce it. Well, let's see what happens, because their forecast 2 years ago were they're going to increase 7.6 billion tonnes a year. We put out 600 million tonnes in Australia. just a very, very minute amount compared to China. If these big emitters do not take action, then what's the point? We're virtually making no difference. We could cut out all our emissions in Australia, but the whole 600 million tonne if you stop breathing, of course. But if the big emitters are going to keep going up, then there's going to be no effect whatsoever on the world climate.
Senator, can I ask you, the Prime Minister said, and you've made the same point, when talking about debt, you've invoked this idea of intergenerational theft, forcing grandchildren to pay for Australia's debt. Now, isn't the same scenario true for climate change? It's only going to get more expensive to reduce emissions in the future.
That's why the big emitters must act.
But they are acting. China's pledged to cap its current emissions at 2030. The US has pledged big cuts.
They've pledged to cap it at 2030. To cap it. That's
New Zealand's pledged cuts.
Yeah, let's see if they actually do it. Yeah. I might be around to see it.
Wait, I mean, come on, Wacka. It's actually pretty urgent that we act as a globe, right? And
we're doing our bit the same as you, Terry. If you're in government, we're doing the same as you. It's just that ours not costing $10 billion a year. It's $2.5 billion a year.
Giving out to polluters. There's no caps on emissions.
We're getting the same results, and we will meet our 5% reduction.
When will we see the detail of Labor's emissions trading scheme?
Oh, that's really up to Mark Butler, to be honest. I mean, I'm not the Shadow Minister for Climate Change. I'm as you know, an opposition backbencher. But, you know, we've got our national conference at the end of July. I know there'll be a lot of discussion about environmental issues and climate issues at the national conference.
A cheering, clapping backbencher.
I have ironically clapped lately, that is true. And I did get ejected
removed from the chamber
24A as a consequence. But I mean, come on, that sort of self-congratulatory
that doesn't happen in the Senate, you see.
Oh yes, because we're also well behaved in the Senate.
Absolutely,
right,
all the time. Yeah.
Let's move on now. Reports suggest that proposed citizenship laws have been amended, addressing this potential constitutional issue.
I was reading it in Fairfax this morning.
The Prime Minister, in question time last week, accused Labor of rolling out the red carpet for terrorists. Do you think that was a bit of overreach?
I didn't even see it, didn't hear of it, to be frank, because I'm in the other chamber. You would have obviously...
It's been reported, though, that the coalition is trying to wedge Labor on this issue. Do you think that's a fair charge?
Well, I don't know the situation, but I'll say this. We've got to do our bit to keep our country safe, and we're certainly doing our best to do that. And I think every government, that's our obligation, to keep our country safe. And the citizenship rules, there'll be more discussion about that. There may be changes where they automatically lose their citizenship if there's some amendments to the legislation. But if people go over there fighting with Daesh, etc., then they will not come back to Australia, full stop.
I mean, they are playing politics, and it is pathetic. You know, there was that leaked
something you never do.
Time brief. No, you're playing politics with national security, Wacka. Not you, the Prime Minister, and it's pathetic. It's ridiculous. I mean, we've worked so hard to be bipartisan, constructive, bipartisan, on national security. I mean, just look at the foreign fighters legislation, where the process went through the Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence and Security. We've worked really hard to be constructive, and as the consequence of that, the laws have been improved and got into a better state. I mean, for this sort of brief to be leaked about, you know, let's go after Bill Shorten and make him look soft on terror, it's just utterly ridiculous.
Can I ask you, Terri Butler, why is it that constitutional experts, without seeing the draft of this bill, have been able to come out and comment on proposals about it, but the Labor Party has been unwilling to do so, continually saying that you haven't seen the legislation?
I mean, come on.
But if constitutional experts haven't seen it and are able to comment on it, why isn't the Labor opposition?
Well, if you're talking about the Solicitor General advice, I assume that the Solicitor General actually saw the
I'm talking about the
drafting
numerous constitutional experts that have come out speaking about this law.
I've read about the Solicitor General having a view on it. I haven't read about anyone else having a view about it. I know that you guys probably do a bit more reading of the press than I do. But look, I mean, come on, Cowan. It's a bit ridiculous for the Prime Minister to stand up in question time and have a go at us when he won't give us the legislation and he won't give us a briefing. I mean, what sort of irresponsible legislators does he take us for?
So why not point out the concerns that you have about it without seeing it?
But what we've said is, all right, we're open to sensible change. Bill has said the citizenship presently provides for the removal of citizenship from people who fight with foreign armies. He's already said that he thinks it's sensible to consider whether you can extend that to non-state actors. But, I mean, to expect us to go further than that when the Prime Minister admitted in question time last week that not even all of the Cabinet had seen the draft legislation. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And maybe that's a sort of slipshod operation he wants to run, but we actually are responsible on our side and we want to run collective decision-making around known fact. It's not speculation. I mean, you can laugh, Wacka, but on your side, the Cabinet doesn't even find out about the legislation that's going through. There's all sorts of criticisms about the way that your Prime Minister is running the Cabinet or not running the Cabinet. You've got leaks from the ERC, you've got leaks from the Cabinet.
So it should be like your predecessor, the Kitchen Cabinet of 4, how your predecessor Kevin Rudd ran the place. That's how we're supposed to run the Cabinet.
I don't want to alarm you, but Kevin actually isn't here anymore.
That's
why I'm here.
But you're throwing darts at us. Do you think we're suffering severe amnesia? We don't remember when you were in government, your predecessor Kevin, the Kitchen Cabinet of 4, and forget the rest.
I think governance is important.
This might be a cue to wrap things up. Thank you both for your time.
Thanks, Callum.
Thanks, Terri.
Wacka.